are just ranked under fun with flags. It's very close. Okay. So ATP provides chemical potential energy. It is a nucleic acid. It is made up of the adenine and the phosphate groups connected in the middle by the ribose. If you want to utilize ATP, then hydrolysis must occur, which is going to knock off that third phosphate group. And in doing so, we release energy and the third phosphate group. And this is a rechargeable battery, so we can go the opposite direction as well. And we can construct ATP from ADP by tacking that third phosphate group back on through breaking down nutrients. Normally this is from oxidizing glucose, and we will end up sticking that third phosphate group back on, restoring that chemical potential energy so that the cell has energy later on whenever it needs it. These processes require energy, so sometimes we have to build things in a cell that requires ATP. Sometimes we have to transport things across membranes or within cells that requires ATP. Sometimes we just have to physically move something. So anytime that you perform a muscle contraction, you're requiring ATP to actually get the muscle fibers shortened to contract. The construction of ATP, so this process here is happening inside of the mitochondria, which is why it's typically called the powerhouse of the cell. I want you guys to know, however, that the mitochondria is the site of ATP synthesis, and this occurs through oxidative phosphorylation, which just means you're adding a phosphate group by oxidizing food. That's all that means. And we left off talking about the physical structure of the mitochondria. Your mitochondria has, it's surrounded by a membrane, so it has a phospholipid bilayer around the outside, but then it also has an internal membrane, so it has two membranes. The one on the inside contains protein channels, and one in particular that we're going to look at is called the ATP synthase. And this is where ATP is actually produced. This is where ADP becomes ATP. This is where we recharge that battery. Something that's kind of interesting about the mitochondria is it is once thought that it was its own organism because it has its very own DNA, it has its own genome. And it's thought that it was phagocytosed, so it was, it underwent phagocytosis from a larger cell, and that's how we ended up with mitochondria inside of our eukaryotic cells. Kind of interesting. Okay, so if we were to look right here at the internal membrane and zoom in, so this is the zoom in sign, we're zooming in, we might end up finding a structure that looks like this. And this is that enzyme. It's a protein, and it's going to speed up the formation of ATP, and it is called ATP synthase. ATP synthase. This is the structure within the membrane of the mitochondria where ATP is formed. Looking at it, is it an integral or peripheral protein? It is an integral protein. Is it transmembrane or not? It is transmembrane. So it is an integral transmembrane protein. And again, this is found in the inner membrane of the mitochondria. This is not out in the cell membrane of the whole cell. This is inside the mitochondria on that inner membrane. Right there. We're zoomed in. Okay. So, the process in which this works doesn't really matter to us too much. It's a little bit outside the scope of the class, but what we end up seeing, this is the final step of cellular respiration. It's the electron transport chain. We'll see some hydrogen ions fall through this membrane protein. It's going to be moving from a high concentration towards a lower concentration. And whenever it falls through this membrane, so this would technically be facilitated diffusion, there's going to be a shape change within the protein, and that energy and shape change is going to take ADP plus a phosphate group and end up cranking out ATP. So I want to come just below that now. And we'll kind of add in this final idea. ATP synthesis. Takes place in the inner membrane of the mitochondria. Uses the protein ATP synthase. All right. And I think that's it. So we went over the structure of ATP, we went over the function of ATP, we went over how ATP goes back and forth between being ADP if it's uncharged to being ATP if it is charged, and how the energy is liberated from the ATP molecule. And then we got into where it's made. So we're looking in the mitochondria, we're looking at the inner membrane of the mitochondria, and it's formed using this protein within the inner membrane of the mitochondria, which is called ATP synthase. So think of ATP synthase sounding kind of like ATP synthesis. That's what occurs there. All right. What questions do you have? So now, from now on, forevermore, you will not refer to the mitochondria as the powerhouse of the cell. You're going to say that the mitochondria is the site of ATP synthesis through oxidative phosphorylation. And you're going to sound so much smarter. All right. Sound good? Cool.